Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Life from the Inside Out with Kris. Before we begin with Kris's unparalleled metaphysical content, I know that many of you watching have felt a sense of being ungrounded, unhinged, or out of balance in these times. I know, I've felt this way too. Kris's teachings have similarities to popular ideas such as the law of attraction and the secret. The difference is that Kris's knowledge goes even deeper into reality creation and helps resolve many of the problems identified with the law of attraction. The information he shares helps restore grounding and that sense of balance that many of us have lost in these times. If you're ready for the law of attraction and secret 2.0 and want to be a part of this fantastic community, then hit that like button, subscribe, drop a comment below, and press the bell icon so that you get notified when Kris releases cool, new metaphysical content. Kris also offers life-changing online seminars, private sessions, and mentoring sessions, which are all linked in the description below. Glad you're here with us, and let's jump into it. And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Life from the Inside Out with Kris. And today, Serge is here with us. And before we get going with the episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things, if you've been enjoying these episodes and liking the content that Kris is providing, as well as perhaps there's a lot of people right now that are feeling a little bit unmoored, unhinged, perhaps a little off balance. Digging into some of this material deeper with Kris has been helpful, one for myself and many other individuals. I know I've worked with Kris on some of the mentoring sessions, and I really describe them as life-changing. The regular interactions and the one-on-one interaction and the advice he provides has really helped me to understand what's going on inside of me and in life. And it's one of the reasons I'm passionate about doing these podcasts with Serge. And we'll have links in the description below, so check those out. And that's one of the ways to get in touch with Serge and Kris. And Serge, it's good to be with you.
Hey, Dan. Yes, it's very nice. Beautiful day here in Toronto. Sunny, breezy, like just perfect. I could actually deal with that right until December 24th.
Yeah. We'll see if it sticks around. You never know. You'd have to come out to California for weather like that all the time.
I think it's been last time I was in California, LA area, Castaic area. I think it was in February 2006. Well, it's been a long time. It's been a long time. 6 years.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
well, okay, go ahead.
you were saying too about the mentoring sessions and all that. Um, it still boggles me that I've been speaking for Kris for 40 years, and after all this time, Kris still has a lot to say about a lot of things, and that's what boggles me. Like his insights, his approaches, his nurturing attitude, his compassion for people is actually truly humbling. Um, Even after all these years, that has never wavered, ever. It's been his hallmark.
Yeah, I know for me, I had, read about Seth and even read Kris for quite some time, and maybe about 13 years. And just reading the material there's only a certain level of understanding. And when somebody takes the leap to come to a seminar or a mentoring session or really begin acting directly, there's just a different level of understanding that happens with those interactions. So I'm grateful for what you are doing and being able to provide that channel and encourage people to check it out.
And it's not only life changing for you or others that have been part of the Kris experience for so long. It's also been life changing for me. Not too many people are aware of my own growing up background, um, but let's just say that if it were not for this phenomenon in my life would be very, very different and probably quite dire in many ways. Statistically, people who grew up in the kind of familiar environment that I grew up in end up with a lot of emotional and psychological problems. And quite the contrary, what has happened with my life. Like I beat the odds many times over in that respect. Just even having my own inner communication with Kris and his insights like that.
Yeah, I know for me, that it's restoring a sense of inner connection and and also to ourselves and then reflected in others. So um, we talked a little bit about that in the last episode, touching on intuitions as well as getting in touch with our inner self as a way to reduce our projections and sense of disconnection and even some of the and then growing from there perhaps even a sense of trauma, and how to relieve that. So wondering if perhaps Kris has something to say about that.
Yep. Yeah, I
Since he
just
has
got
something to say about everything.
yeah. It's very much like the Lord of the House, pulls the bell for the butler to show up. So he's pulled that bell. So
All
he's
right.
showing up.
Well, let's see where we go with it.
Now we trust that you are comfortable,
Oh, very comfortable. Thank you, Kris.
and we thank you for your consideration.
Thank you as well.
And we also thank the viewers for their consideration. Now, it must be said in response to your statement about finding some means of balance, equilibrium, a kind of groundedness in life. The old adage that if you do not heal your own wounds, you will end up cutting the people that love you, does stand, because you will be projecting your own pains onto others, even if they love you and you love them. And that creates eventually a toxic-like environment. And the more one actually believes, again, we are back to this topic, the more one believes that they are damaged goods, that they are wrecked, broken, even sinful, tainted, filled with iniquities. The very idea that this is considered acceptable is in itself cause for concern. The human being, at its very core, is sacred, holy. But somehow or other, something has convinced individuals to believe that quite the contrary, they are anything but sacred and holy. This may have been established long ago as a social norm, wherein certain institutions or organizations first sell you a certain kind of bill of goods, which states that you are sinful, filled with iniquities, a literally bad person, and that you must seek some kind of redemption through the wares that they sell. The same people who get you to buy into the idea that you are filled with sin then offer you the solution. In politics, this is considered a very, very big no-no. And yet, in certain kinds of organizations, this is considered more than acceptable. It is your path to redemption. And that creates further problems because the individual actually develops a sense of disempowerment and powerlessness because they must continuously look to another, to a source outside of themselves. So they must do certain things in certain ways at certain times under certain conditions to merit being redeemed. And that simply furthers the very problem that started all of this. Just the notion that one even challenges all of this with the countermeasure that you are sacred and holy, of course, initially might truly upset the apple cart. It might even upset one's view of the world. But you might not be able to see who and what you are until you upset the conventions that are there. So, for instance, in the New Testament, and we're only quoting it because it is familiar, it is said that Jesus went to the temple and became angry at those who were selling redemption. So he upset all their tables. Of course, the establishment did not look nicely upon this because this is their means of living, their means of support, of livelihood. But on the other hand, if one truly understood what was being done with this story, then the individual can begin to see what they have accepted into their lives and what they can simultaneously now end up rejecting. And the best way to reject it is to move away from that kind of a thinking and to align oneself with the very deepest possible sincerity that they are sacred and holy beings, that within them sparks the fire of life. And that fire can be fanned to light their path, not to a redemption, to an external source of power that may or may not judge them in one way or another, but to actually recognize that their actions create the outcomes of their lives, their inner actions, their thoughts, their belief system, their worldview can be altered in a way that restores their sense of balance, their sense of wholeness. And that you no longer have to literally walk on eggshells lest you commit some kind of offense to some supernatural being that may smite you at the slightest provocation. So we just bring that up to enunciate the idea that there is another entire dimension to consciousness forming itself as a human being, taking on that role, consciousness becoming human expression, to bring about that greater sense of wholeness, that greater sense of connection, plus the adventure of learning how one creates their own reality. That particular latter part is one of the reasons why you come here into this plane of existence. Not because of some karmic debt, not because you might have done this or that, but because you desire to challenge the status quo at its deepest root. It is not necessarily the easiest kind of experience, but the sense of fulfillment that is derived from the experience can launch the individual into a whole new understanding of their very existence. That you are not here to suffer, you are not here for any other thing than to experience the strength and the power of being holy and being sacred, and to apply that in life itself, in your life. You can look out the window, you can look over your balcony, you can look at people down the street and begin judging them in one form or another. Or you can look at them and actually sense the light, the tiny sparks of goodness that exists in every living thing, human beings included. Even trying to do that can have an enormous impact in how you feel, because if you begin to look for that in others, you may begin to notice the same thing in yourself. Now, for some, that might be a scary proposition, thinking that somehow or other you might be sacred and holy, perhaps even after being told for decades that you are anything but. But to actually begin to taste that is both groundbreaking and elevating at the same time. Now, how does that feel?
Well, it represents a major shift for a lot of people. I think moving from something based on fear and power structures to moving to ideas and stories based on collaboration and cooperation, and moving there individually and as groups.
Indeed. In a discussion with a friend not too long ago, Joseph understood in many older polytheistic religious systems, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, ancient India, and so many other places, even many native cultures, had a multiplicity of divine beings. Whether they were cast as male or female is irrelevant. But what was interesting is that human beings could interact with them in many different ways, sometimes in fun ways, sometimes not so fun ways, but there was always a certain kind of approachable deity. When monotheism started coming into the play, especially in what concerns Abrahamic religions, what do you have? You have one supreme being that will smite you, turn you into a pillar of salt, whatever it is, if you displease this being in the slightest. Case in point, being dissatisfied, as the story goes, the supreme being decided to just wipe out most of humanity. There seemed to have no longer been any fun in that kind of a supreme being. You always had to do as you are commanded, or else, which is fear-based, not loving-based. So this kind of a deity is psychologically abusive. Does that make some sense to you?
Yeah, I follow you. And then it's no wonder, based on our conversation earlier, that that shows up in our family structures.
Indeed, because it is set as a role model. Look at what is occurring in America with evangelical systems embracing, literally embracing, a totalitarian system, because it is still part of their mindset. It is built in to what they are fed in terms of religious information.
Hmm.
So it is meant to, our mentioning this is meant to give pause, to think about exactly what it is that you feed yourself with. If the adage that you are what you eat stands true, this also stands that if you, quote unquote, mentally, emotionally, psychologically eat from those kinds of stories, then there is something definitely going to grow out of it. And it may not necessarily be what you think it would be.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And of course, this is but one particular model, one line of development. There are multiple lines of development that span out through what some people call the multiverse, different alternate probable systems where none of this occurs, where the sacredness and the holiness of the human being actually blossoms quite organically, quite naturally, and develops whole civilizations that are based on those principles, which are quite different from the civilizations that your system chose to develop.
Hmm. Well, one thing that's intriguing to me about that, Kris, is coming back to our earlier conversation about community, um, and changing that within our own civilization, I think, starts with one, creating those ideas within ourselves, and then creating communities, surrounding ourselves by other people who are interested in the same thing, and fostering that, nourishing that, and paying attention to that, and giving it attention.
Indeed. Look at the word leader. It comes from ancient Latin and then Greek in its various forms, which actually expresses the situation or position of a teacher. What does a teacher do? A teacher does not necessarily tell you how to think, but it shows you what to think in a specific way. You think in a terms that liberate you. You do not think in a term that imprisons you. So you are not necessarily told that you can only think this way. You can think, but think in as many delightful ways as possible. Think in multidimensional terms, not unidimensional terms. Does that make some sense to you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So a teacher literally brings out the very best in their students. That is the purpose of that kind of situation. A leader is not necessarily supposed to be the kind of individual or group or organization that will tell you what to think, when to think, how to think it, who to think it with, and so on and so forth. This should not concern them. They can encourage thinking in the best way possible. Does that
Right.
make sense to you?
Yeah, we were. I was just talking about this with a group of folks the other day, and I was thinking of leadership, and as an extension of that, then teaching is to create a container or an environment that encourages self-discovery and self-empowerment, which is kind of the opposite of that fear-based or authoritarian style.
Indeed. When love and nurturing actions are engaged, then the very best of the human individual responds in like. This is, of course, the ideal. In your plane of existence, you play with different concepts. And again, the idea is to try and upset the apple cart. But too often, There is a built-in system now where upsetting the apple cart is considered taboo, which is all the more reason why you need to upset it.
Yeah, and if we upset it enough, do we realize that we're driving the apple cart? Is that where we get to?
Indeed, the apple cart, in terms of an individual, is set up by themselves through the things you have accepted to believe. And that makes a significant impact in terms of self-empowerment. The idea that empowering an individual to think and then to act on their thinking in an empowering way can frighten others, especially when you think about how fragile the system is as it stands right now. And everybody tries their very best to shush those who might voice dissent or discontent. Authoritarians are notorious for this. They squash voices of dissent and discontent in order to prevent it from spreading. But dissent and discontent, in many ways, are the means by which you recognize what no longer functions for yourself, and perhaps even for the society as a whole. And you work diligently and amicably to try and create a better, more nurturing environment than what you had before. Part of the difficulty, for instance, many times where revolutions have occurred, those that were oppressed create revolutions, they revolt, and eventually may even themselves become the next tyrant. Because it is difficult sometimes for your species to actually learn from your own histories and actions. And then again, on the same token, this is also part of the reasons why self-discovery, self-empowerment is so important, so that you know empathically and otherwise that the world is not there for you to dominate it, but for you to nurture it, to be its steward. Not to be its master. You can be the master of your own inner world. And in this way, grow the very best you possible.
I like that.
Sometimes it takes a little bit of darkness to see the light, so to speak, the light of knowledge, the light of wisdom. But everyone travels that path in their own way. And please feel free to continue, or would you like a break at this point?
Yeah, so any final thoughts before we close this episode, Kris? That was great.
What we can offer is that, again, everyone is sacred and holy. Even those you would consider the very worst possible kinds of human beings still have a sacred and holy core. And that can be fanned from a tiny spark into a full-fledged fire. And if you recognize within yourself this tiny little spark, then by all means, fan it. If you must, throw fuel on it. Let it burn bright and strong. So with that, we thank you for your consideration.
Oh, thanks so much, Kris.